As always, guys, this is Master of the World 165A. Make sure you have the right kit. Welcome and wine number one.
And if you're new to this fun, just know that it's a completely safe zone in the chat room and the polls. And, we all learn from each other. A big special welcome to those who are joining for the first time. And I love the fact that I get to do this with you, Peter, because we've been friends for a long time.
The pleasure, Madeline, is mine, truly.
So chin
Both you
chin.
and Meng.
And all of those count. So, the questions to consider, and we do this with each of the wines. Sometimes your brain is going, what am I looking for? Well, here are some points to consider if your brain needs something to hang on to. The most compelling non-fruit or earth components in this wine. Our mutual dear friend, Tim Gazer, who's sort of a blind tasting guru, always uses this as one of the most important questions to ask yourself. So beyond fruit and earth, what else is singing in this wine? How would you describe the acidity? Meaning not just quantify it like medium plus or high, but is it racy? Is it soft? Is it, poignant, cleansing, tart? And thirdly, I still use Old World, New World. I'm the elder guard. But, you can say Europe or elsewhere, if you prefer. Are there elements of inorganic or organic earth that speak to either of those? So let's not forget to look at the color. Hold the wine on an angle against the white surface, and all of a sudden, it's not just white wine. It is, and I have to always remind myself, don't drop the glass on your laptop, Madeline. It is actually pale yellow or really straw, with very specific green glints to it, which telegraphs what? Youth. And in terms of how it moves in the glass, I don't get terribly hung up on legs when it comes to white wine especially, but it sheets quickly, which speaks to a moderate, even lower alcohol level possibly, it also will indicate extract and or sugar. And the tears are forming, they were quick and they were in the form of sheeting action. So it appears to be on the light bodied side. And again, the visual is not a good or a bad, it just is. We're not desperate to define this wine, especially from the appearance.
I would also add that visuals, they're leading indicators. You cannot come to any definitive conclusions for the most part from visual alone, but they're indicators of where we might be headed. So keep them in that context.
No, amen to that, Peter, because especially if you're stuck on an initial or final conclusion, and this is assessing quality, but also a deductive exercise. When you're really stuck, circling back to the color the visual will often set you free. Right. So hold that thought. That was a great point.
Right. So the question here is the green, does that, and you said indicates youth, is that our youth or the wine's youth?
I have to tell you, Peter tells the best jokes because I get them. We are young, eternally young in spirit, Peter. There we go.
Thank you.
This is, we tend to, at least in Master Sommelier speak, and not all of you are going through this, but we do like highly aromatic, moderately aromatic, or, more neutral and lightly aromatic. And this to me is right up front, meeting me out of the glass. It's highly aromatic and it's very pretty. And the first attack I get aromatically are, stone fruit, like perfectly ripe peaches and nectarines, and also flowers, fresh flowers. Jasmine, lime blossom, lemon blossom, that type of thing. There is also on the heels of that, just tucked behind, I think, a strong sense of inorganic earth, the whole rocky minerality thing. If anybody comes up with a better term than that, I'm going to buy him a fruitcake and a bottle of wine. But the whole, stony character, it is floral, it is fruity, it has, evident tart citrus on the nose, but I am going to go ahead and taste it right away. I'm intrigued to get the palate working with the nose and not do the nose independently. wow, the attack is a shock because the acidity is compelling. You know, in quantifying it, I would say for me, it's definitely high. And to the point where it was such a surprise that I'm going to, and this is a personal trick, and I taste it again right away because my palate's going, got it, we're doing high acidity. And I want to be able to perceive mid palate when I hold it on my my tongue. That's another personal trick. I'll just hold it and I get a plumb line of flavor. And mid palate, what I get is a touch of residual sugar, but then it cinches up right after that. And it is extremely cleansing, mouth-watering, and delicious, frankly. Alcohol
Juicy.
again, what's
It's
that?
it's juicy acidity.
It's juicy.
Literally,
And
you start salivating immediately.
you said a wonderful thing when we were talking about this wine earlier. There's a tension to it that is very attractive, this sort of fruity tart business. And what we smelled is reflected on the palate. There's the fresh and ripe stone fruit. There's more of a tart citrus attack on the palate, however you want to define it. Lemon, even Meyer lemon, because that little bit of sweetness. And you know, there is tree fruit like green apples, right, Peter? You know, it's tart fruit. The floral is on the palate as well. It is fresh, but I would say there's a little bit of tropical too, like unripe pineapple. And the minerality, if anything, is more pronounced on the palate, even though even on the nose. What else? A whisper of sulfur.
It showed more when we first poured, and
Mhm.
I'm sure many of the participants have had a similar experience. When it was first poured, with a little bit of SO2 showing, and then it blew off within a matter of a couple minutes. And now it's much harder to find.
There is a kiss, just a kiss. Don't get, you know, don't give away the baby on this, but there's a touch of petrol or, you know, TDN, if you will, but it is really a tertiary element. It is not commanding the attention at all. And this wine is long. That is, for me, a mark of great quality. So, you know, light-bodied from the visual to the alcoholic presence, racy acidity, a touch of sweetness mid-palate with a combination of citrus, stone, tree fruit, maybe a little bit of tropical, strong minerality, and cleansing. Anything you want to add to that?
I would just add that the whole question of your reference to TDN, that is one of those things, or petrol, that is one of those things that is very much an individual threshold kind of response. Some
Right.
people have much higher thresholds and don't perceive it until higher levels. Some people are much more sensitive. So if you don't get that, it's not necessarily because you're a bad taster.
You're not wrong, right?
It's just it's just a question of personal sensitivity to particular characteristics.
That's a great point because we all
I just
have,
want
you
to
know,
say I
thresholds.
love this tension that you were talking about, that you guys are talking
Isn't
about.
that a great word?
And it's I just had some soup before coming on, and it's so cleansing at the same time. It just kind of opens up your palate for more, I feel
This
like.
is a dangerous wine. I just swallowed my sip, you know, so much for spitting it out. And to remind everyone, especially those of you who haven't done this before, this is an anonymous poll. The other isn't there just to be politic. If you really, none of these three options resonate with you, put other, and then, and you know, if you feel like it in the chat room, say what you were strongly considering. This is, again, a very friendly zone. So we've got two highly aromatic varieties, Riesling and Muscat. Big diff there is the acidity levels on Muscat tend to not near those of Riesling, and the floral component is even pushier on Muscat. It's part of the whole terpenic Gewürztraminer Viognier category. And Chenin, which is a tough wine to blind taste for me, is semi-aromatic but shares acidity with Riesling, floral components with Muscat, and a strong earthiness. And then on the region, France and Germany for Europe, New Zealand and California. If you think up something else, go for it. I always love the South African option because it's sort of straddles the new and the old worlds in its own little unique way. How are
Very,
we?
very much so. Like
Don't you
one
think
foot in the
so?
new and one foot in the old.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Are people voting, Li Meng?
Yep, people are voting. We're almost at
Come
100%.
on, go
That's
for
what
it.
I always aim for, guys. 5 seconds, right? The last two folks, or however many folks who are not voting, please get it in. As Maddie says, it's anonymous and it just makes you put a stake in the ground, which I think a lot of blind
Mhm.
tasting is about daring to make a choice. All right, here we go. Sharing our answers here. We've got 89% of folks in Riesling territory, 7% in Chenin, and 4% in Muscat. So, do you want to talk a little bit about it first?
I want to talk
Definitely.
just very briefly that
Yeah.
if it is indeed Riesling, and most of the people, are planted firmly in Germany as opposed to France, which would be probably Alsace, right? And I do think there's a big diff between the Riesling expression in those two areas. I mean, Germany has, more than one region and plenty of sub-districts, but France generally, you'll will have, I think, a stronger expression of TDN even when the wine is young, higher alcohol, and a thicker, richer mouthfeel, whereas Germany is on its toes unless it's a sweet expression.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And generally speaking,
Mhm.
Rieslings from Alsace are quite dry and broader shouldered, and the higher alcohol, of
Mhm.
course, it accentuates that perception. And I want to just say, quick little editorial aside, because Americans, we in the wine industry, we love to say Americans talk dry and drink sweet. And when the wine presents with a little bit of sweetness,
Mhm.
people feel like they're not supposed to admit that they enjoy it. And I always want to take a glass of wine like this and hand it to somebody and say, now
Mhm.
taste this and look me in the eye and tell me you don't like it, because
Right.
I'm going to have a hard time believing you. It is so, we have a national sweet tooth. We sell a zillion cans of Coca-Cola a year. So to claim that, that nobody likes sweet wines is kind of specious.
It's just right. It's just not true. And
Yeah.
we are, I'm in my aisle seat in business class, Peter. You can sit, wherever you like on this plane. But we are in Germany and we are in the Rheingau, and you can see the river there. And we're actually at the eastern end of it. This is a producer that is famous for actually Auslese. They established their reputation on it, but makes generally beautiful wine in Kidrich. And if I'm slaughtering German pronunciation, somebody please set me free. I do Greek well, I do French pretty well, and I fake Italian and Spanish, but I can't do German at all. So we're in the Rheingau, where the eastern reaches, because the grapes come from Kiedrich and Eltville. This is a Cabernet. And it is fresh. It's got that, more residual sugar than you might think in terms of grams per liter. They claim 42, but that is like a true testimony to what a fake out, high acidity can be in terms of perception of sweetness. This comes from partially from their estate vineyards that are famous. They're, Grosescovex level, and partially from surrounding vineyards. But this is a producer that's been around since at least 4 generations. There was a Robert Weil who passed away, who was the great grandfather of the current winemaker owner, who's his great grandson, and who was born in 1963, but he's the 4th generation. And this beautiful blue label, by the way, was his work. When Wilhelm took over in the late 1980s, they referred to this as the Tiffany blue label that I
It,
thought
it
was really
definitely has
cool.
that vibe with the gold foiling. Maddie, just there's a question here from Jerry, and I love
Mhm.
that Bill jumped in to answer it too. I love it when our community helps each other out. He struggled between Riesling and Chenin,
Right.
and there were folks who said that they didn't really get that
Mhm.
TDN. How would you? Because it wasn't just the TDN that pointed to Riesling.
No, I mean, I think there's a lightness to it. I think there's an alcohol level. This is really lifted. It's on, it's on its tiptoes in terms of alcohol. I think the acidity level could be that of Sauvignon for sure, but I think there's missing an earth element that's in Chenin that those of us who used to wash our cashmere sweaters when we could afford them and didn't take them to the dry cleaners always called wet wool. Sometimes people call it something else. I think that you know, also that just distinctive combination of citrus blossom and peach apricot stone fruit is a thumbprint of Riesling. You know, the TDN is very minor in this. It's like third or fourth down the line, and it's just melted into it. So I wouldn't struggle. And I'm going to tell you, if you have the happy problem of struggling, whether this is Sauvignon or a German Riesling, yay. I also think Sauvignon, a Chenin this dry from the Loire will not have that much RS mid palate. So there's that also, which is another reason why the alcohol is very, would be very modest. By the way, Rheingau, and there he is, isn't he, you know, noble looking Wilhelm. I didn't know this, but the Rheingau, their plantings are over 80% Riesling. So this is a growing region that, you know, mostly south-facing slopes, very protected by the river, tends to be warmer than the regions further south, but Riesling dominates here big time. So very different than a Mosel expression. I think it's a beautiful example of a Cabernet. Don't you, Peter?
Yes, I want to add one thing too on the Chenin versus Riesling. Loire Chenin tends to show a little bit different fruit profile. To me, it's more quince, pear, and with a little age, they start to show honeyed quality, honeycomb.
And the botrytis is evident in it, even in you know, this wine I don't
Even
pick
in
up
dry
any,
wine.
but I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And one quick side note about Robert Ryle. To me, this is an interesting little case study of what I would call responsible corporate ownership. Robert Ryle is still very much at the helm and is still, you know, a partner, but majority ownership is actually Suntory. And you never hear a word mentioned about Suntory on their website. They don't deny it, but it's a great example of corporate ownership where they've basically said, what
Here's
resources
money,
do you
take
need?
care of it.
Yeah, what resources do you need to continue to do an exceptional job here? We will provide them. And we've all unfortunately seen many examples of wineries that have been taken over by corporate ownership that suffered in the aftermath.
Have you carried this for multiple vintages at Ferry Plaza?
We have, and we've carried multiple wines from them as well. They do just to make sure that you folks know, there's a similar label, similarly priced, that's just labeled Riesling Trocken, not Cabernet. And that is a bone dry version, basically of this wine, but in a bone dry presentation.
And at the end of the day, fair to say, since they're famous for Auslese, this is one of those what I call eeny meeny producers. Everything they make is, you know, dependable plus.
Stellar.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready for wine number two?
We are.
We're ready for wine number two. So again, Madeline referenced the questions to consider, but would you call this a highly aromatic or moderately aromatic wine? What are the most important non-fruit markers? And can you describe the wine's acidity and alcohol levels? Just things to think about as we taste through. Visually, it's a darker color than the previous wine and the Riesling. I would describe this as a medium straw. The previous was pale straw, but it has the same green highlights that the previous wine had. Absolutely brilliant, clear. The nose, like the previous wine, there's a distinct impression of stoniness that comes through. And this whole question of minerality is such a minefield for most of us, because there are people who are of purely scientific bent, especially Western scientific bent, meaning if you can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, or measure it, it doesn't exist. The whole idea of minerality is very problematic to some of those folks. Personally, it's in the glass. It's in the taste, it's in the smell. It's like sucking on a wet rock. So I may not know how, we may not know how exactly to draw the linkage between growing conditions and the finest finished wine, or explain chemically how that manifests in the wine, but it's hard to deny that it exists. So that's here as well. The fruit character in the nose, it's very interesting. There's a slight herbaceousness, but I also get underripe mango and papaya. It's a distinctly tropical character, a little bit of stone fruit, but more in that mango papaya realm than the previous wine, the peach apricot thing we got out of the Riesling. Very fresh, no evidence of oak. In terms of the tiering, it's got more viscosity, seems to have more weight than the Riesling did, a little bit slower to descend off the side of the glass. Of course, the cleanliness of your glass makes a difference. Always.
There's a richness to the mouthfeel on this that is
Mhm.
very attractive and really a departure from the previous wine. There's no dishonor, or it's not incorrect to weigh in different elements on the wine before or after whatever you're tasting. But there's you know, sort of a thicker texture, very smooth, and though the acidity is refreshing, it's not as shocking
It's not
as
it's
wine
not
number
as
one.
blazing as the
Mhm,
previous, and
mhm.
it's a broader mid palate, and the minerality presents differently as well. It's there. There's a stoniness, almost a chalkiness to it, but it's fairly broad in the mouth, and it compared to the previous wine, it's bone dry as well. One of the things I always like to look at is does the wine follow on the palate, or I should say on the palate, does it follow the nose? Is it consistent with what you were set up to expect in the nose? I mean, to give you a sense of the contrast, for example, a dry muscat can have an incredibly aromatic floral nose that suggests that the wine is sweet, but then in a dry version, it can make an abrupt left turn on the palate. I call those gustatory non sequiturs. My own,
I'm
my
not smart enough to understand that, but okay.
well, you know
I
what a
see what you
non
mean.
sequitur is in
That
language.
I know.
It's
Yes,
just it's a
yes.
gustatory non sequitur. So this is not a non sequitur. This follows quite I think logically from the characteristics in the nose. A little bit of herbaceousness again, almost a savory herb element. And the mid palate is slightly tropical, yellow apple, a little bit of green, like sweet lemon, almost a Meyer lemon character.
And there is a comment here about it being leesy. For those of us who don't understand what leesy means, can one of you explain that?
Yes, I think that's contributing substantially to the texture. It makes the wines broader and richer in the mid palate, and there's a slight nuttiness on the finish in this wine, which is coming from that character as well. And basically, what we're talking about is wine that is aged on the fine lees, meaning the sediment from the fermentation, but fine lees as opposed to gross lees. And the distinction there is gross lees include all the skins and the sediment from, non-grape material sediment from the fermentation. Fine lees would be after you pump that off and you still have all of this very fine material from the fermentation in suspension that settles eventually to the bottom of the tank or the barrel, and those are the fine lees. And they help to prevent oxidation. They add texture and richness to the wine, and they can also protect it to some extent from deleterious effects.
Is that dead yeast is a
Yeah,
question.
basically, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the breakdown of the enzymes, there's a process called autolysis where that material breaks down and it contributes to the character in the wine and helps to protect it as well.
Mhm, mhm. Great. I get the bitterness too that Bill's getting, that
Mhm.
phenolic thing that you guys were talking about.
Yep.
That's the, as Maddie just put it out there, is the skin contact that's giving that phenolic bitterness.
Yeah, I actually didn't mention bitterness. That's a great call because it's
Mhm.
definitely there. And it comes especially on the finish. but it's not the acidity on the finish, as much as it's present, it isn't the same as the Riesling. It's not that like mouth-watering, juicy.
Attack,
This is a
right.
broader, richer, rounder sensation on the palate where
But it's not
fruit.
deficient, right? Because I mean, we can feel it. It's
No, not
still
at all.
there,
Not at
right?
all. It's just it's a beautifully balanced wine between the fruit, the minerality,
Mhm.
the slightly leesy character, the bright acidity. And I don't get any evidence of oak other than possible texture here. If the wine was on the lees for example, large old oak casks, that is a contributing factor, but it's not flavor that's coming from a young oak or new oak barrel, vanilla, spice, that sort of thing. It's more, I think, limited to a textural impact.
Mhm.
I loved how you mentioned that the green element, because I think there is just, fresh herbs, like lemongrass. It's not the green element is not commanding, but it's in there and it's lovely.
It's subtle, and to me, it's sort of both dried savory and fresh herb, like fresh lemongrass, fresh, maybe even fresh thyme. I mean, it's very subtle, but it's a really nice element in the wine as well.
If you're joining us for the first time, I think one of the values of Master of the World that I hope to bring to the forefront here is you really should have 6 glasses in front of you right now. At least 3 as you go through the 3 whites, because going back and comparing between wine number 1 and wine number 2 helps you understand dry versus slightly higher RS, residual sugar. And you certainly are seeing the different mouthfeels and different acidities as you compare.
Li Meng, this is actually a really, really important point because I do a lot of photography, and you often, when you're taking a photograph, you often don't know what the perfect exposure is going to be. And so you use a technique called bracketing. You take the picture at one set of exposures, then you take it with the shutter speed changed or the aperture changed to one side and then to the other side, and you do that multiple times until you've figured out where the sweet spot is. Here, you can use a similar technique to help your own palate refine its understanding. So going back, for example, if you think that this second wine is sweet, go back to the first one, because where the sweetness comes from in this second wine is the richness of fruit. It's not actually residual sugar. And there's a distinction. The first wine has very high acidity, but it also has residual sugar. And those two are very different.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, been putting the poll out because from the comments, I can tell that this was going to be one that people were going to need to ponder. And I'm going to end the poll in a few seconds here, so get your vote in anonymously. But I think that the confusion is on the table.
Well, I
So
can just hear people going, "Oh my God, do I need to blind taste Verdejo?" You know,
I want to say this to everyone here. If someone else got it and you didn't, it is okay. Remember that there are folks here. We've been making, oh my gosh, 60 plus monthly kits now. Some of you guys have been with us from the very beginning. So there are going to be some folks who are really trained in this way of tasting. If it's your first time, do not be overwhelmed. I can see literally as we're talking from the chat, the confusion. And here's the poll results. 30% of folks think that we're Chardonnay here, 20% Sauvignon Blanc, and 50% Verdejo. No one's got other on the table, or maybe you're too shy to put it in.
Well, in the chat, somebody mentioned Albarino, which is actually a very good call on this. It would be a warmer, I think it's David Simpson, it would be a warmer zone for Albarino. And certainly in Spain, for example, in Rías Baixas, there are areas that are much cooler, areas that are much warmer where Albarino is grown. And Albarino can have some of these same tropical fruit elements, similar acidity, etc. So not a bad call at all.
I'm going to lead the discussion a little bit here on what not to reveal and what to reveal, Peter. I do want to congratulate us. We have 90% of folks in the old world Europe between France, and Spain. So right off the bat, can you explain how this is not New World in your mind?
Well, it comes from somewhere else.
Mm,
It's not, I think that to me, the most salient thing that takes you away from the New World is the stoniness, is the minerality. That, we do find minerality in the New World, but it's much less common. And much more common in the Old World. And I know that, there's some of the folks in the politically correct universe want us to stop using Old World, New World. I will make a little editorial aside here. I think that is silly. I don't see any reason or anything negative about saying Old World, New
we
World.
agree. Yeah, we've been talking about that for sure. But Peter, I think that people are confused. I just want to say this, whatever this wine is, it's 100% of the variety that it
Right.
represents.
Right.
So we sometimes put the word blend in there just because our app does blends also. So it covers off when we have a Sauvignon Blanc that's, blended or whatever. But in this particular case, it's 100% of the variety. So do you want to reveal and then you can explain the differences on where we are, or how do you want to do this?
Sure. Let's go ahead and reveal, and Maddie and I can talk about
Why?
why. Yeah. Yeah.
It was
Okay.
neat looking at those three options because Sauvignon Blanc is a highly aromatic variety.
And
Chardonnay is not and takes its character from how it's made. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this wine to me has characteristics that suggest Sauvignon Blanc.
But a kiss, right?
Yeah, you can definitely find qualities here in the fruit that suggest Sauvignon Blanc, and depending on where the Sauvignon Blanc comes from, you might find the minerality as well. Although the areas where Sauvignon Blanc is grown, where you'd find that minerality, tend to be much leaner and much more linear in style. And this has more roundness and richness in the mid palate than the typical Sauvignon Blanc, unless it was blended with Semillon or with another variety. But for example, you think about Sancerre or Sauvignon Blancs from the Styria region of Austria that are just bracing and super linear and crisp in their intensity. We are in Rueda in Spain. So if you look at the larger map on the left, we're basically northwestern Spain, about an hour and a half to the northwest of Madrid by car. Rueda is a fairly old zone. And in fact, Verdejo has been planted in the area since the Roman era. It's one of the oldest white varieties in Spain. However, Rueda as a region did not really start to come to modern prominence until the early 1970s when Marqués de Riscal, the famous Rioja producer, relocated their white wine operations to Rueda and started focusing more on Verdejo. You can also grow in the Rueda appellation. You can grow Chardonnay legally. You can grow Sauvignon Blanc legally. And there's a third they just authorized that my brain went blank for a moment. But
Chardonnay.
I mentioned
Did
Chardonnay,
you mention
Sauvignon
Chardonnay?
Blanc, but there was a third that was just authorized as well.
Gotcha.
There are a fair number of less expensive Ruedas where the Verdejo and the Sauvignon Blanc are blended. And based on this wine, you can imagine that those two would be fairly compatible blending partners. But in the case of Nicia, this is one of the Jorge Ordonez properties. And this is from the southeastern corner of Rueda, where the soils are predominantly sand, because basically the Duero River, tens of thousands of years ago, was much, much, much wider than it is today. And it deposited a ton of sand and river stone in this area. And because the soils are so sandy, phylloxera has never survived in this area. So we are talking about really old vines, some of them 80, 90, even 100, 110, 120 years old.
And we're high plateau here.
Yes,
So
in
it's
fact, the whole
super
central,
continental.
the whole
Big
central
diurnal
Spain
swings,
is an
right?
elevated plateau. So
Mhm.
that's often not obvious unless you visit. It's also very arid. You can see that these are dry farmed. There's no trellising, no irrigation system. They're totally dependent on what Mother Nature delivers in water. And as old and enfeebled as those grapevines look, don't let it fool you. They are factories of life. They produce small quantities of intensely flavored fruit.
Go away, leave me alone, and let me
Yeah,
do my job, right?
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And just a quick editorial side about Jorge Ordonez. I mean, I've been doing business, and Madeline probably has as well, with Jorge for 20 plus years, 30 years. And those wine that his portfolio went through a period in the 80s and 90s where he was clearly chasing Parker points, and the wines just got totally galumphing and overly oaked and just became almost caricatures. There's been a major correction in his portfolio, and he now owns at least 6 of the wineries that he works with around Spain, and they are much more grounded and rooted in traditional varieties, in traditional winemaking, and the quality is really off the charts. I mean, I visited a lot of his properties in last September and was very, very impressed with the pivot in that whole.
It's great you say it, because some people may have an impression of Ordonez wines from the past that's just not
I had that
true
impression.
anymore.
We went from a period where we did a ton of business with him to where we did literally no business with them. And now we've come all the way back around. So to his credit, and his kids now are involved, his son and daughter, and he seems to be giving them a lot of influence as well. And it's just wonderful to see, because they're really celebrating some of these old traditional regions.
I
Nacho
just want
Alvarez is the winemaker for the wines from
Nacho. I
and
want to
from
be
Rueda.
Nacho.
Yeah.
not just great. I just want to add, Peter, one of the things as I'm hearing you talk about your relationship with, brands and wines, one of the things that I love about shopping in a store, whether it's an independent bookstore or independent wine retailer, is the personality of the buyer, and your relationships and your interactions really come through. And it's not corporate wine buying. It's not like, and Maddie, I think for the same reason, Plum Market has you really making it personable. So it's not just a corporate wine buying experience. You have
Well, we're
relationships.
also spoiled to death. I mean, the Plum team, Peter, me, Debbie, and we want quality in the glass, and it's either there or it's not.
Yeah.
But knowing if it's in the glass and the people are cool, what could be better than that?
Yeah.
Also, I think it's important to point out too that this obviously we're driven by passion, and in our case, we're a buying team. There are 4 of us who work together on the sourcing, and that's because we don't always agree, and we sometimes will decide to purchase a wine that one of us is going to be the champion for, and the others are so-so, but we know there's an audience that will love that wine. But it's also, from a business standpoint, it's a survival strategy. In California, you can buy wine everywhere. Supermarkets, big box stores, 7-Eleven, Safeway, etc. And we are better served by having a selection that the big guys don't have. So it's a deliberate strategy. And then, that's also philosophically aligned with where we are, which is to support small family producers, people who are farming organically, biodynamically, et cetera. So it's a very, it's a nice symbiosis between the business survival strategy and our actual philosophical, position.
Yeah. Agreed. We have to move a little bit
I can be
faster.
quick on number 3.
Awesome. Okay.
But
Oh,
I really, go
but
ahead.
we do have to answer one question, because it happened here. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Verdejo. What would you say to the folks who picked Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc? How would you sum it up in one sort of kernel?
With Chardonnay, I would have looked for more wood influence, unless it was a Chablis style. And in that case, I would have looked for more lemon curd, lemon pith, more stony minerality, etc. The Lees thing could be there. You could have the minerality, and the fruit profile would lean more towards yellow apple, green apple, etc. In the case of Sauvignon Blanc, I would expect more herbaceousness and
And grapefruit.
and grapefruit and
Right.
lemon pith. And if it was an old world Sauvignon Blanc, not quite as fat and round in the mouth, more noticeable linearity.
Awesome. All right,
And
Matt, you're gonna
Chablis
have
is
to
like
catch up.
eating shells to me, you know, and it wouldn't have had quite as much of a broad character as this did. But that said, wine number 3, this is where color on white wine gets very interesting, and you can compare. I think it'd be really cool. Pick up 1 and pick up 3 and put them next to each other. Wow, you know, white wine is not just white wine. On this, you know, we had straw with green glints and actually a silvered edge. And on this one, we have positive yellow with gold glints. And actually, I would say not brilliant, but it is not a flaw. To me, this reflects a probable decision to fine and or filter less. You know, just hold that thought for a minute. And questions to consider, we're describing the texture, the mouthfeel. See if there is any oak influence and how it's reflected in the wine. And ask yourself the question about complexity, which is not some fuzzy, you know, feel-good term. It has to do with how many elements are you can pull up and describe on the nose and or the palate, and also the length. So also how this wine moves in the glass, it definitely has a thicker, slower look to its movement, particularly in contrast to wine number 1. So which was running, I think, about if you did a little peel and reveal thing, was running about 8.5 alcohol. Wine number 2 is running 13.5, and we don't know yet about wine number 3. That look, by the way, white wines darken with bottle age and also with aerobic winemaking, as opposed to anaerobic winemaking. So it's a possible indication of wood treatment, but don't get married to that thought before we march through the rest of the wine. On the nose. Wow. Again, this is highly aromatic, but it's coming across more from a sense of development. It smells vinous, which is the opposite of fruitiness, like it's had a little bit of time, not oxidative, but definitely developed, and also a beautiful combination of a kiss of malolactic, a kiss of new oak, in the form of beautiful sort of cream and a little bit of vanilla, and also a yeasty, leesy component aromatically. The fruit to me is very much tree fruit, like perfectly ripe, yellow apple. And, you know, I'm not being precious because the green apple tartness was evident on wine number 1. This is yellow apple and like Bosque pear, brown pears. I tend to be down to earth in my description, so I promise you I never get too cute or fussy about it. I think somebody mentioned caramel popcorn. I love that. There's a corn element to the smell of this, like an illusion of sweetness, and definitely tropical, but it's more like ripe pineapple. Remember how we've smelled, especially in wine number 1, more of an unripe character. I don't know if there's minerality. There might be a hint, but I don't want to get married to the idea. And I think somebody, if I'm riding the horse of caramel popcorn, I'd also say maybe a little bit of butterscotch or toastiness. To me, there's evidence of oak on this, but in a complex, you know, careful way. Let's go ahead and take it on the palate. I almost dumped my glass. That would be bad. So cheers. Very interesting. And not negative, positive disconnect between how the nose expresses itself and the mouthfeel, especially the acidity is a surprise. It is mouth-watering, not quite as compelling as wine number 1. I can feel a little alcohol in my chest, but again, this is not a negative thing. It simply is part of what is adding richness to this wine. It's a reminder of to us all, alcohol adds an illusion of sweetness, but it also lends itself to mouthfeel. There is a strong nuttiness, both on the nose and on the palate, that I didn't mention, like a combination of pick your nut, you know, hazelnut, or I always get on white wines, cashew, macadamia, that sort of sweet nut character that I think can express both lees, but also a little bit of age. I think this has seen some bottle age, but not to the point of being tired in the least. There's evident lees contact to me that's coming across in a little bit of yeastiness, but there's also the mallow is reflected in a creamy mouthfeel and flavor. It's not a butter bomb. I'm taking another sip.
Madeline, to me, it's almost like a slightly custardy quality in the,
Brilliant. I love that. And also, but then you have the lift of the acidity. So this is, I didn't catch this until I got it on the palate. And I always, by the way, even knowing the wine, approach it very innocently, as if I hadn't tasted it before and know nothing about it, because I want to speak its language, not what's in my head. There's a combination of ripe fruit and tart fruit in this wine. It speaks to a cooler growing region. The alcohol is not high, it's just evident. And also a use of oak that I think is very judicious. I hesitate to say this word because it's a little dangerous, kind of like TDN, but I'm going to say it. When I first tasted this wine, there was a teeny touch of reduction, which I think a lot of people throw that word around in sommelier circles without necessarily knowing what the hell it is. And to me, it's very simple. It's the opposite of oxidation. There you have it. And, there was a period of time, particularly in Burgundy, where white Burgundy producers were positively paranoid about oxidation because of the whole Primox character years ago. But this was just a whiff, and it's there, but it adds to the complexity of the wine. It in no way commands your attention. So
when
creamy.
it was first poured, it came across as a slight nuttiness.
Mm-hmm. I love the mouthfeel of this wine that is rich and the custardy feel and flavor to it. I love the toasty oak. It's so judicious. I love the lift of the acid and the brief breakdown of reduction and oxidation. Hold that thought because I touched on it and we can go into it further. I just don't want to get into a long thing, but consider careful use of less exposure to aerobic conditions than not, which is involved with how often you rack, if you rack, that type of thing, where you're protecting the wine from oxidation. I think this is gorgeous. I think the finish is good. It's not super long, but it's sufficient. High quality, rich, dry white, probably non-aromatic variety, but TBD, that has been exposed to oak judiciously. Let's put up does anything else you want to say about it, Peter? Or does that feel good?
You covered it.
Grape varieties. Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio are what we call less aromatic or more neutral varieties that make them sound lesser. They're not. They take their character in no small part with where they're grown and how they're handled. And there's a big difference in Chardonnay from Chablis and Chardonnay from, the Russian River Valley. Pinot Grigio, again, a big difference from Alsace Pinot Gris that can verge into almost overripe character with an illusion of sweetness or even actual sweetness to racing. By the way, where are you today, Peter, according to your landscape? I was going to say Alto Adige, right?
My faux backdrop. I'm not really there, but I love the photo. So that's Alto Adige in Italy.
And Chenin, we touched on with Riesling because we have acidity levels. We have the whole stone fruit business and minerality. So consider all those options. I think this wine, by the way, does have some minerality. Ask yourself, how compelling is it, and is it inextricably a part of the wine's identity? Are you voting?
Yeah, well, folks, you guys got to vote. We are seeing a good participation of almost 75%. But I was
come on, 100.
Yeah. I love to give everybody else a few more seconds. I just love how much the oak is coming out in here that we didn't see as much in the first two wines, right?
Right, and but a light touch. It's not heavy-handed, and there is a toastiness to it. It's just really well handled. Sometimes oak gets a bad rap. I
Okay,
have been one, are we revealing? Or
I'm going to
we're
end
gonna
the
show the
poll.
poll
I'm going to
results?
share the results and you can
Mhm.
decide, Maddie, how you want to reveal. 79% of folks are on Chardonnay, 14% on Chenin. I think that we've had Chenin on all three polls and someone's going, it's got to be in one of these.
I think I took it off one of them, but you know.
And then you've got Pinot Grigio at 7%. And you know, interestingly, between old world and new world, Europe versus not Europe, it's about
Evenly divided.
Yeah,
yeah.
and then there's South Africa, its own animal. But what's interesting to me is it's almost exactly balanced between France and California. And I would well imagine that's the folks, the dominant, you know, vote for Chardonnay. And I think that's fantastic because the minerality is in there. The question is it, you know, is it White Berg or is it somewhere on the west coast of the United States? South Africa, you know, Chenin Blanc is done as well there, if not better than anywhere else on the planet. So, you know, well to be considered. In Italy, Pinot Grigio for sure. Okay.
So let's
I
go.
think, you know, and let's get on our plane. But the one thing I will say about Pinot Grigio, I should, not to say it doesn't happen, but it's very, very rare that you would have that kind of overt toasty oak and presence
The
of
same with Chenin.
mallow. And
And the same with Chenin.
same with Chenin. So we're going to say it's Chard. The question is, where was it made? And we've got someone who's claiming a producer. I love this. Reminds me of Mount Eden. Okie dokie. We are going to California. We are going to the North Coast. We
Well
are
done,
going to
California.
Fela is based in Sonoma, so they source grapes from Mendocino as well, and also the Willamette Valley. This particular wine is Sonoma Coast, which is not unlike, and you know, you guys are the California people. When I hear Sonoma Coast, it's like saying Texas. You know, it's a huge region, but you know, and there's been a lot of blah blah about the true Sonoma Coast. Well, you know, Fela specializes in cool climate sites. Some are estate, a lot are not. And this is a winery. Actually, 80% of these grapes are estate grown and biodynamically farmed. You will see the bottle age, and we've got 22, but 21 would be accepted in a blind tasting because I think it's showing the vinosity, that beautiful word I mentioned earlier, that simply means characteristics that the wine will have that it wouldn't have without some barrel and or bottle age. This is a producer that when did Fela start? In the late 90s as Fela Jordan. Aaron Jordan, owner, winemaker, you know, staged around the world, worked in various places in the New World and the Old World, and really got obsessed with, you know, cool climate vineyards, and he likes to specialize in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Pinot was his first focus, but he also does
And Syrah.
and Syrah. You ripped the words
he-
out of my mouth.
He worked
Absolutely.
at Jean-Luc Colombo and Cornas in the
Mhm.
Rhone, and he's a big champion of California Syrah.
And you know, cool climate Syrah to me, cool climate California Syrah to me is, you know, definitely something worth paying attention to, both in terms of sheer quality potential, and frankly, it can go neck and neck with a lot of Northern Rhone producers. I think that this is a memorizable expression of a cool climate wine. That why New World and not Old World? I would say because the fruit is more forward, the winemaking is more forward, the minerality is a little bit subtle. But again, if you're having the happy problem of struggling between, you know, either A++ Mâconnais, but more Meursault, you know, I think Côte de Beaune, and somewhere in, you know, Sonoma Coast, or you know, South Central Coast, or even Oregon, you're having a happy problem. I
I
love
would
this
also
wine.
argue that Aaron would be quite happy to have you mistake his wine for a
A
Chardonnay.
white Burgundy, right, right. It's delicious. I just swallowed it. In terms, I'm going to throw a little food thing out here, and then we've got to march on more quickly for your 4, 5, and 6. But you know, to me, barrel fermented Chardonnay just melts into anything with butter. you know, butter noodles. That's my favorite thing that is comfort food when I need cheering up. Just a thought.
All right.
Okay, guys, we're gonna hustle here
We're
on these
hustling. Go for it, Peter.
favorite wines.
Take note of the questions to consider in wine number 4, but I'm going
Mhm.
to dive right into looking at the wine. We've got a medium ruby, maybe even more of a plum to me, which that's a little bit darker than ruby, which suggests more red. The wine's fairly youthful. It has a smooth transition to a slightly pink rim. Very little staining of the glass. All of these things together suggest maybe a thinner skin variety, maybe a cooler climate, in that it's not leaving a lot of color or pigmentation on the side of the glass. And the pinkish rim suggests youth as well. I mean, it's bright, but with red wines, it's harder to, talk about brilliant versus bright versus hazy. Definitely not hazy, but I would describe it as bright and no more than that. The nose is immediately appealing. Red and black cherry, red and black raspberry. Nice lifted, almost a violet or lilac, a floral note that really comes out of the glass. And as you swirl it, you get some subtle savory notes, almost a little bit of root vegetable. It smells youthful as well. It's mostly primary fruit. If there's earthiness there, it's fertile soil as opposed to stoniness.
Right, more organic than inorganic. It's in
Yeah,
there, but it's, you know,
yeah.
a secondary or tertiary
Almost like
characteristic.
you've turned over a bed in your
Mhm.
flower garden.
Like we all are now.
Yeah, and I get a little bit of baking spice from it, but it's very
Mhm.
subtle. Maybe a little touch of cinnamon. Very subtle, very nicely integrated into the wine. And the herbal note that I mentioned, it's to me it's in the form of like dried sage, and again, very very subtle.
And tea leaf too. But, you know,
Mhm.
just dried leaves of some sort.
Mhm. Medium bodied at most, medium plus acidity. Now I'm getting some stoniness on the palate that I didn't expect from the nose, a slightly chalky quality. If there's oak there, it's very subtle. Again, a light spice note, cinnamon, maybe a touch of nutmeg, but very understated and really nicely integrated into the wine. Medium tannins, and the acidity is the sort that's actually accentuating the character of the tannins and accentuating a little bit the minerality. This is always one of the things that I find is the hardest to communicate to people trying to learn wine tasting, is that acidity and tannin reinforce each other. And sometimes it's very hard to pull apart on your palate who's on first. Here, the acidity is fairly prominent, and the tannins are medium at most, maybe even medium minus, but they're being accentuated to some extent by the acidity.
There's a great thing going on in the chat room about the quality of the tannins, and that will help you with the deductive reasoning on this wine.
So would you characterize that? You said medium tannins. Is that ripe and chalky? Is the question that Natalia has.
There's a slightly chalky character to them, yes, especially on the finish. It reminds me a little bit of like sucking on a cherry pit. After you've consumed the cherry, and the fruit profile follows straight through. It's red and black raspberry, red and black cherry. It's very fresh. It's very lively. Really beautiful quality to the fruit, and both red and black is an important indicator as well.
I think so too. The tannins are considerable, but they're not aggressive. They're not hard. You know, they're gently drying.
They're very fine grained.
Mhm.
And here they're also accentuating the sense of a slightly chalky, stony texture as well.
Mhm.
Madeline, anything to add before we
No, I think, you know, a kiss of earthiness. I think this wine really speaks to its varietal character. And I think the grape variety options are bang on the money. You know, Gamay and Pinot Noir often being confused, particularly in France, where, you know, a lot of Cru Beaujolais producers are doing more traditional fermentation, and Barbera, which can have, you know, high acidity, moderate, softer tannins, and can handle oak. I think some of the
it
spice
depends.
that you're getting is either oak or the variety, and I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
also some people have mentioned a whole cluster character, and I think
Mhm.
that's here as well. Not carbonic, but more whole
No,
cluster.
right,
And any of those varieties could be produced with whole
right.
cluster.
I love what folks are saying about the poll. This was a difficult one. You know, these guys have basically picked the things that, you know, Pinot Gamay is a hard thing to tell the
Yes.
difference between.
Problem, happy problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Barbera is a bit of a chameleon depending on how it's
Right.
produced. I mean, some Barberas in Piemonte are aged in barrique and are
Mhm.
totally different than a Barbera that's done in cement, or similar and intended to be a fresher early drinking style.
I
Okay,
don't
so I'm
know.
just gonna throw it out there because we gotta move and save enough time for the last two wines as well. Um, 44% of you picked Pinot, 37 Barbera, 19% Gamay. Peter, you're gonna need to explain where how we're deriving at the very answer. I'm gonna
That's
go
very interesting. So evenly divided. I mean,
yeah,
these are all very credible guesses based on how the wine presents.
Right.
But we are in fact in Oregon, and it's Pinot Noir from one of the pioneers of the Oregon wine industry, Elk Cove Vineyards, founded in 1974. And at the time they were founded, they were literally one of 8 wineries in the
Eight,
state.
right.
Eight
amazing.
wineries, and now there are over 1,000 wineries in Oregon, just to put things in perspective. In fact, Elk Cove today, still family owned, the Campbell family. Adam is the winemaker. Elk Cove today manages 380 acres of producing vineyard, and that's more than the entire state had when they launched the winery. Um, the other piece about this, I love the name Elk Cove. When Joe and Pat Campbell first found this property in 1970 and bought the property in 1974, they moved up there with their 2 young kids who were literally, less than 5 years old, and they lived in a trailer the first year. And one morning they came out of the trailer and there were 40 Roosevelt elk sleeping on their little terrain there in this bowl, like before they'd even planted the vineyard. So that's how the name Elk Cove came about.
Peter, is this in the north in Yamhill?
They're predominantly in Dundee. And keep in mind that when the winery was established, none of these AVAs existed. The McMinnville, Eola Hills, Amity Hills, Yamhill, Carlton, Dundee, Chehalem Mountains, Ribbon Ridge, those are all official AVAs between 2004 and 2006. And then the latest one, I believe, was the Van Duzer Corridor, which was 2018. But most of their vineyards are in the Dundee Hills area. And they were one of the families that was instrumental in getting these AVAs established.
Okay, so let's sum it up for folks here. Natalia, I think, has the summary question. The tell that it's not Gamay. What is the tell that would have been not Gamay? Was it the color? What was it, Peter?
It was lack of carbonic, although you certainly don't always have carbonic with Gamay. But to me, that was the major indicator that would take me away from Gamay.
Hmm.
And I think
And
too, you know, I put this in the chat. I think this is an example of how Oregon Pinot, as a gross generalization, but at its best, is truly a bridge to Burgundy in terms of how it shows in the
Little
glass.
little bit more earthiness. Yeah.
Yes, Absolutely. And also, I'm always hit by this, and this is a killer value. It's their entry Pinot, which is, you know, a steal, but it also has so much promise. I find that Oregon Pinots at their best really are going, can't you give me just a little bit of bottle age? So buy a case and open a bottle a year.
Yeah. I do want to say, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time here, but I do want to say something about Pinot in the New World, especially. And, you know, Madeline and I have colleagues who will make these declarative statements, blank something. That's
God love
Pinot
them.
Noir from
Right.
X, that's Pinot Noir from Y. Pinot Noir is one of the oldest grape varieties on the planet. It has an incredible number of clonal variations. It's incredibly susceptible to its growing condition, to, you know, characteristics that are manifested or a manifestation of growing conditions.
It's not easy to
It changes
grow.
with rootstock. Even after decades in the industry, I listen to people make those declarative statements and I think to myself, I don't have the confidence to say that. It's too much of a moving target. Pinot Noir is a real challenge to get your head around. Keep in mind, Burgundy, where we think we have these characteristics nailed down, we're talking about 2,000 years of growing. They outlawed Gamay in Burgundy in 1375. That's how long they've known what grows well where. And the vineyards, the major vineyards in Burgundy that we think of today, the Grand Crus, the Premier Crus, many of them were identified during the Middle Ages by the Cistercian and Benedictine monks. So we're only 150 years into this exercise in the New World, and I think we need to give ourselves a break. It's early.
I promise you, Li Meng, I'm powering through 5, which means I'm going to motor mouth. There's a lot to this wine. So I give Peter at least 5, maybe 10 minutes, because I'm
Sorry,
usually
I
the
needed to go
caboose.
on that. I needed to go on that rant.
Okay, no, it was a good rant. God love you. Okay, color, big time here. And this is where, you know, red color comes into play huge. This is true dark ruby in the center. Let your eye follow the color from the center to the very rim. It lightens up, but the hue doesn't change. It's basically the same color from the center to the very rim. There's even a little bit of a purple tone to it, or violet, which indicates what? Youth. Probably not a large thin skin variety like Pinot Noir or Gamay, just saying. And if you turn your glass, it is staining the glass, absolutely. So there's extract. It moves, you know, with some weight to it, and slowly the legs are a little slow to form. So let's say that it's showing quite a bit of extract, quite a bit of color extraction and youth. Aromatically, wow, this wine has so much complexity that it throws my head back, but I'm going to try to go in order of what hits me. The first thing I get is not fruit. I get this combination of pepper, both white and black, and like a sanguine, bloody, meaty character to it, and savory, like dried herbs, big time. There is an earthiness to it. There's a smokiness to it that may or may not be wood derived. I'm sorry, I'm talking into the glass, so I'm resonating. I just adore this smell. And it is a combination of red and blue and black fruit, but I think on the nose, it's hard to tell what leads. I'm going to wait till we get on the palate and see how much of the fruit is tart and how much of it is ripe. Aromatically, it's coming across as ripe black fruit. There's also a potpourri character to this wine, like you just buried your nose in a box of potpourri. And if I had to pick one smell, I'd say lavender. You know, so highly aromatic, combining pepper, meatiness, smoke, herbs,
I
earth,
get
ripe fruit.
green and black olive too.
Oh, bang on the money. You know, that adds to sort of a salinity to it, or a savory. It punches up the savory character. I'm going to make Li Meng relax, immediately go to the palate, but I will say I am not being distracted by any new oak on this wine. There may be, but boy, if it's in there, it is not a primary dominant element.
It's a beautiful wine. Whatever yours,
Honest to God, somebody said in the chat room, it's you, Li Meng, bang on the money. Soy sauce, right? So there's an umami character to it, and also a little that balsamico that contains God knows how much stuff. But what I find very prosciutto, somebody just said, I think what's so cool is that what we're perceiving on the nose is beautifully reflected on the palate. The only difference is that there's a surprising cinch of acidity. The tannins are pretty smooth. I think this has actually got a fruitiness to it that is possible whole cluster or partial whole cluster. But another example of saying whole cluster is not saying carbonic maceration. You know, it's a decision to punch up the fruit. It is, the finish is long but textural and mouthwatering. So I think this wine is young. I'm going back to it one more time. Talk about in the glass. If you hold it on your palate, a personal trick, the quality of fruit is stupendous. And the expression of earthiness is memorable, both both mineral, meaning inorganic, and organic as well. Fruit, pepper, meat, smoke, herbs, earth, medium plus acidity, pushing high. Medium plus tannin, more drying than the Pinot Noir, but not what I would call hard. Anything else you want to add before we put the poll up, Peter? Otherwise,
There's-
you'll have no time.
The fruit characters, both slightly underripe, ripe, and
Yes,
slightly
and right.
overripe.
Yes, no, bang on
It's
the
like
money.
this spectrum, the potpourri that you got in the nose comes through in a little bit in this desiccated fruit quality on the palate, but it's also underripe and fresh and just perfectly ripe.
I think
It's
the
a-
red fruit is, I'm answering my own question, is more sort of cranberry pomegranate, and that comes through on the palate. What do we consider? Syrah blend, because it's often blended. Tempranillo and Grenache, aka Garnacha, or a blend. I will tell you right up front that this is, and I don't mind saying this because you said it with wine number 2, Li Meng, this is 100% varietal. So Syrah, Tempranillo, Grenache. And since it's 100%, I will remind us all, and please vote with confidence and with enthusiasm. And nobody's playing with other. I'm
No,
going
very
on the
good.
record to complain. I missed the other thing. Grenache is a thin skin variety on its own, we're cognizant. So if it's not blended with Syrah and Mourvedre, it will tend to look more translucent than opaque and have softer tannins. Tempranillo, if it is Spanish, and especially if it is, Crianza on up, will have an element of oak to it, and also an oxidative character born of both barrel and or bottle age. And Syrah, which, can be a star in different areas of Australia, both warm climate and cool climate, but also the Northern Rhone. And as we mentioned a minute ago, in areas of California, its thumbprint is pretty recognizable. So completely agree with prosciutto, agree with Northern Rhone. I'm staring at the chat room. This is one of the most interactive chat rooms we've had, Li Meng. I love it.
I know, I think so too. Bill says feels more new world than old. I don't agree with that. What do you think of that statement?
I think that it's like exuberantly varietal, but I think, just when I taste with the thought of deductive reasoning, the earth may not express itself right up front. Whoa, Syrah's leading the pack. But sometimes you have to look more closely on the second, third, fourth approach to catch the earthiness, which I think is pretty clear here. But, this could be Barossa, not Barossa, Shiraz, not Shiraz, and have an earthiness to it as opposed to the Northern Rhone. I think we should forge ahead and let's see.
In defense of the New World argument,
Mhm.
the fruit is the quality of the fruit
Mhm.
is impeccably modern and pure,
Mhm.
and that sometimes suggests New World more than old. So that's just a momentary aside. But the whole deductive process is also what isn't it and what it isn't. And in this case, I don't think I've ever tasted a Tempranillo that had that black and green olive character.
I don't disagree with you. And I also think the expression of, sanguine, bloody, meat, smoke, and pepper, this is a memorizable wine. And I'm not saying anybody's wrong. One look at the label's worth $1,000. I love telling people that in blind tasting. And I was never good at it. And I was so thrilled after I got over the trauma of doing it in my exam. And thanks be to all the gods that I passed. But I much prefer counseling as opposed to doing it. This is actually a legendary producer, Alain Graillot, from the Northern Rhone. They are from Croz. This particular wine is 100% Syrah, though in Croz and Hermitage that it encircles, they have the option of adding up to 15% Marsanne and Roussanne. This is a guy who nested in Burgundy at Domaine du Jacques before he came home to make, stunning Northern Rhone Syrah. This is 100% whole cluster. And I think this wine, hold on to it for 2 days, unless you like threw it back or you're sharing it with three
Hold
friends.
on, there's none left.
No, but I was going to say I think the nose is memorizable for those of you that are going through, blind tasting exams. I think this is a great example, and not Pinot, Syrah, that shows you what whole cluster does. What does it do? It means the wines are not destemmed, and there can be an element of carbonic, but just a kiss. But it adds a freshness and a complexity to the wine, though sometimes there's a green element. I think the quality level of this wine is stunning. The oak varies from 1 to 3 years, so there's a teeny little bit of new wood, but not much. And actually, the base wine is concrete, fermented in concrete. And if you want to memorize something from the Northern Rhone in terms of recognizable, I think this is a gift, don't you, Peter?
Yes. Unfortunately, Alain Graillot himself has left us.
Passed away. Yes.
He died in 2022 of an aneurysm after skiing in the Alps. I guess a nice way to go. And his sons now are in charge of the property.
They're doing a killer job. I mean, the Mistral comes into play here, but in a different way than in the South. What it does actually, it prevents a lot of mold and mildew. So, it keeps the vineyards nice and fresh, and, elevation or actually hillside exposure comes into play in the Northern Rhone. But, the terroir is granitic and schist. And here they are, Maxime and Antoine.
I mean, a couple comments are showing up about the 2021. I think it's worth mentioning that 2021 was a fairly cool and not an easy vintage in the Rhone, and I think this wine's an incredible accomplishment in that context. When I tasted there in 2022, I was more impressed with the whites from the 21 vintage than I was with the reds.
That's right. You were on the trip I couldn't go on.
Yeah,
I remember that.
And all of those of you in the chat who went to the Northern Rhone, whether Saint Joseph or Crozes Hermitage or one of the others, congratulations. You would have passed that exam because those would have been acceptable answers.
Yeah,
but really mess with this baby over the next 24 hours. Even your empty glass, because especially aromatically confirmed on the palate, it's a great example of Northern Rhone Syrah.
I want to make a comment about the production of this wine. I don't usually jump in with the production, but in this particular case, we actually bottled it out of magnums. So when Peter had made the selection and we were trying to buy the wine to rebottle, the sales rep said to me, you can have the 22 or you can have 21 magnums. And I go, bring on those magnums. Our process will take the magnums. And Peter, you probably have the last of these 750s in 21s. But in magnums, I wonder if the youth that some of these folks are talking about here, that it aged a little slower because it was sitting in magnums.
This I'm sure many of you are aware of, this is still one of those wines that's typically allocated. So you can't buy however much you want. You couldn't go in and buy a pallet of, your distributor will tell you, I've got 3 cases for you, I've got 5 cases for you, whatever it may be, based on your relationship, but there are not unlimited quantities. And the reputation of the producer is such that, the demand exceeds the supply.
Yeah.
The fact that you're showing this wine, bravo, Limaine. Peter, you're on. You're the caboose.
Okay. I like being the caboose. All right. Keep a note or make note of the questions to consider, but let's go right into the appearance. We are now in a different territory, as would be immediately apparent when you tilt this wine on its side. It's opaque. It's saturated with this deep purple color. It leaves a considerable amount of extract on the glass. It stains the side of the glass, so substantial tearing. And it looks very young, very youthful, and it has a very last minute and abrupt transition at the rim to magenta, which usually suggests a richer, more deeply flavorful wine, and a lot, sometimes more tannin, although we don't know yet. It's a very different nose, really quite intriguing. There's a lot of deep blue and black fruit. It's ripe, it's fresh. There's a floral note as well. It reminds me of a little bit of the floral note you get in Touriga Nacional
Oh, yeah.
in Portugal, where there's this violet top note that floats up above the deeper, richer fruit. A little bit of spice as well, some oak spice, cinnamon, maybe even a little cardamom, which I did not expect.
It's plummy smelling to me.
Yes, it's very plummy
Mhm.
and very suggests very rich fruit and plush fruit.
David's got a good one here. Blueberry pie.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of blueberry pie, but pie specifically, not fresh blueberries, because there's a richness to it. Blackberry even, blackberry pie, blackberry compote. It's very seductive. It actually pulls you in. It makes you want to taste.
I just
Trying
pulled
to-
more from the bottle. Such a gorgeous color.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
the
color
color
is
is
just
amazing.
shocking. But
Here
the
again-
mouthfeel, I can't wait till you describe the mouthfeel because I love it.
Well, I always, I come back to that original question I posed. Does the palate follow the nose? Absolutely. The initial attack is of this plump, juicy, succulent, rich fruit. And then mid palate, the wine's grip and structure sets in, and you get a little bit more firmness maybe than you might have expected. The oak that's there is very subtle. It's beautifully integrated into the wine. The tannins are medium, maybe medium plus.
Got a luscious mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And killer mid-palate fruit. Whoever said blueberries, bang on the money.
Yeah, and you even get the floral character is even coming through on the palate with this lifted perfume that sort of floats up the retronasal passage and gives you this suggestion of violets or lilacs or something like that. Very, very pretty. It's both fresh and got some tartness to it. In very modern, impeccably modern winemaking.
Look at these options, Peter.
Yeah, actually, let's go to the options. There we go. So Malbec, Dornfelder, who the hell's ever heard of Dornfelder? Zinfandel, other, and then the regions. So do you want me to, Limeng, do you want me to give folks a thumbnail on Dornfelder now, or do you want to wait?
I think it's a good idea.
I think that given that there's a WTF on.
Mhm.
Okay. So Dornfelder is a grape it's a cross, meaning it's a combination of other vinifera that was developed in Germany in the 1950s. And it's been very successful in Germany. The Germans actually drink a lot of red wine, and a lot of it comes from elsewhere, but they're increasingly drinking their own Pinot Noir and their own Dornfelder, things like that. But I have to tell you honestly, and I suspect Madeline would say the same thing, I've tasted thousands of Pinot Noirs, thousands of Chardonnays, thousands of Cabernets, et cetera, over the course of my career. I think I can count on less than 3 hands the number of Dornfelders I've
2
tasted.
for me.
So it's not, there's a little bit of Dornfelder in California. There's a little bit in Australia. I mean, people are playing with it in other parts of the world. There's some in Austria, but Germany is really where it's the most prevalent, and even there, it's not a huge.
And it's easy to grow. They love it. It makes
Yeah.
delicious wine that's rich and not a heart attack. I put some classic tags for Dornfelder in the chat room. I hope you don't mind, Peter.
Not at all. Not at all.
I love
Here in California, there's a little bit in Santa Rita Hills, Santa Barbara County. Brian Loring, somebody mentioned, was one of the producers down there that was a champion of it. I'm sorry they ripped out the vineyard.
Bill, if you ever took your SATs, I'm sure you did well. That is that is one strategy. Who's the odd one out? And I'm picking that. Um,
One question to Peter, though, because I think it's really important. Why not Malbec? Because the floral element is strong on Malbec, right?
The floral and the blue fruit thing can be
Right.
strong in Malbec. I mean, there's a lot of characteristics here that suggest Malbec. I would expect firmer tannins, I think, in Malbec.
It's a Bordelaise variety.
Yes, yeah. Whether or not, more or less oak, I mean, that's a producer prerogative. So hard to be more definitive about that.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a lot of Malbecs that had this floral lift either. They tend to be more dark berry fruit, blue fruit.
I think we can safely say that folks were looking at the non-European New World, Argentina, California. You add that up, that's almost like 90%, 89% of folks are in the New World. And that's probably speaking to the fruit element that you're seeing, Peter.
Yeah.
And you can ask yourself, why not Zinfandel? Because Zinfandel is a very specific expression of what? A combination of ripe and unripe fruit. It tends to be a little bit of a one-note wonder. And I don't know if what you want to add to that.
I'm going to disagree with you. Zinfandel is one of the most challenging grape varieties to taste, I think.
I'm with you.
Because it is such a chameleon. It can be a simple, light, fruity red. It can be something much deeper, much more profound, which typically comes from the field blends. If you think about the ridge wines, the wines that Joel Peterson has made over the years,
right?
That are Zinfandel labeled Zinfandel and are in most cases predominantly Zinfandel, but not all. That's where you get this kind of depth and complexity and power. But Zinfandel just presents in so many different ways. I find it personally very frustrating to taste. So, shall we reveal?
Yeah, it revealed, and I don't know where it went.
So we are in Monterey County, Santa Lucia Highlands, and this is a Dornfelder. It had a massive production of 98 cases, and it was a collaboration between Master of the World and our retail enterprise. The wine was grown by Steve McIntyre of McIntyre Vineyards, one of the best growers in the Santa Lucia Highlands, all organic. The winemaker was Byron Kasugi, who has his own label, B. Kasugi. He makes Pinot Noir, Gamay, and a handful of other things. He also consults for Miura and makes the wines for them. He consults for Kingston in Chile. He's a very modest guy, a lovely guy, an English and English literature major by training or by educational background.
Did you contract this particular cuvee, Peter? I mean, this is really neat stuff because it's a Ferry Plaza wine, correct?
So yeah, it's under our label, and Li Meng can explain what the imperative was for Master of the World.
Yeah. So we make very, very limited wines once a year. And the Dornfelder was something that Evan actually collaborated with Steve McIntyre and Byron to make. And we have a winemaker here, Kate Noel Smith, who really guided us through the process. So she and Byron were working together through the harvest, and then we sent samples to Peter during the process to get his approval and make sure that he liked it. And as Peter says, we kept a little bit for us, but we actually sold most of it to Peter. And Peter now is the only person that has this Dornfelder at the Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant. So if you want more of it outside of our
You can
mini
get it.
bottles, you can get it.
And they
It's
ship.
yeah, and they
A
do ship.
couple funny asides here, though. We're talking about Dornfelder from Santa Lucia Highlands. I mean, who knows what Dornfelder tastes like anywhere? So you need, in order to
Right.
be definitive about what a particular region has brought to a wine, you need to have a frame of reference. And let's be honest, we don't have much of a frame of reference when it comes to Dornfelder in the Santa Lucia Highlands, as beautiful as that photograph was. If any of you are literature fans, you may know the book Steinbeck's Pastures of Heaven. That was written basically about that area of the Gavilan and Santa Lucia range and Upper Carmel Valley, Salinas Valley in the Monterey County area. So I actually grew up in Carmel Valley. It's my home stomping ground. So I always feel at home when I look at those photos.
Peter, I'm just so glad it turned out well. I just remembered that throughout the harvest and throughout the fermentation process, getting phone calls from Kate going, I'm really worried because as a winemaker, you're seeing the in between and you don't have a benchmark either to sort of benchmark process. So
No,
Kate was like, I'm
we're
looking at
looking
the lab.
for what we're looking for in a wine like that, and we only do a small. We have in any given time, anywhere from 800 to 1,000 wines in inventory, and only two or three of them might be under our own label. What we're looking for is a wine that is interesting, that has a story, that people are going to enjoy. Is this appealing? We think so, and that was more the issue. We're not frightened of taking on something that people don't know because we have a wine bar, we can pour them by the glass. And in fact, this has been incredibly popular on the wine bar. It's a completely new experience for a lot of people. The only other thing I'll just add as an aside is this is the Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant label. And I'm not going to mention any names here, but there are a lot of retailers, big retailers, especially in the US, where there are lots of wines on the shelf that are completely fictitious brands. And even the stories are made up.
Yeah.
And in our case, we wanted to prove that private label, honestly presented, could be great wine. And we're not hiding anything. It says Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant right on the label, a little blurb on the back about how the wine came about. So no sleight of hand, no made up winery, no made up winemaker, no made up story about how the family planted grapes, in 1422 or whatever it is.
I
So
love it.
it's a
Yeah.
little different approach.
Yeah.
We have a deal going for these wines, Lee Ming.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't make any money from the 750 sales. All of those sales go to the Ferry Plaza. But it's a new thing that we're trying out, bringing Peter on, having his help to run the seminar. But also, hopefully, you guys, if you're looking for these wines and you want the 750 versions to stock your cellars with, Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant, the QR code here leads to their website. They will sell these wines. And the Dornfelder, if you liked it, it is the only place that you'll find it. And the 21 vintage Crozes-Hermitage from Alain Graillot, that is where you're going to be able to get it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. We are putting a $20 coupon to get you guys interested. But Peter, I believe if you buy 12 bottles, you guys have a 10% off also, right?
Yes.
Thank you again for everyone for being here, and enjoying the wines with us. It's just so fun. For me, it is the highlight of my month to be doing these webinars.